This edition of the Impact Podcast is brought to you by Engage. Engage is a digital booking engine revolutionizing the talent booking industry. With hundreds of athletes, entrepreneurs, speakers, and business leaders, Engage is the go-to spot for booking talent for your next event. For more information, please visit letsengage.com. Welcome to another edition of the Impact Podcast. I'm John Shegerian, and we're so honored to have with us today Brent Gleason. Brent just wrote a book, Embrace the Suck. He's already a New York Times bestselling author with his book, Taking Point. Brent, welcome to the Impact Podcast.
John, thanks so much. It's an honor to be here.
It's an honor to have you, true honor. You're an American hero, like so many other great people we've had the honor to interview before. But before we get talking about your new book, Embrace the Suck, which I loved and I have in my hand right here, and I really welcome our listeners and our readers and our and the people who watch this podcast to buy and read this book. Before we get talking about this book, tell us a little bit of the Brent Gleason backstory. Someone doesn't become you just from being born. Explain where you were born and how you even got to this point in your life.
Sure. I grew up in Dallas, Texas. So I had to represent with my forged clothing t-shirt. Grew up in Dallas, did my undergrad education at Southern Methodist University. So I earned degrees in finance and economics there. And so actually upon graduation, I took a job as a financial analyst with a global firm based in downtown Dallas. But during that time, I had a very close friend of mine at SMU who was a year behind me in school, one of my fraternity brothers. And he was actually one of these young men who had a lifelong dream, a passion, a vision of one day graduating, joining the Navy, and at least attempting to be accepted into the notorious SEAL training pipeline. And while I thought that was very admirable, of course, a call to serve, and keep in mind this was just before 9/11, so it was peacetime, a little bit, obviously, not a little bit, very, very different environment, and a bit of a different mentality when it comes to the concept of military service. But he and I started training together. So for me, it was just a way to, stay fit and have a purpose and an accountability partner.
Yeah.
Also help a friend prepare for his arduous journey in preparation for just the entrance physical test, just to get in.
Right.
And so we started spending a lot of time together and having a lot of dialogue about the implications of this journey. And that piqued my interest, of course. So I started reading books about the history of the Naval Special Warfare community, our forefathers from the underwater demolition teams in World War II, how we essentially cut our teeth as an elite assault force in Vietnam. And that gradually, if not rapidly growing interest, coupled with the somewhat boring nature of my entry-level financial analyst position, led me to the culmination of a decision to basically live a life of no regret. The spreadsheets and pivot tables would be there for me later, and give to a cause greater than myself. So I decided to join him on his journey, let my parents know that I was quitting my job, much to their dismay. And he and I then moved up to Crested Butte, Colorado, where we trained for an additional 6 months or so at about 11,000 feet altitude to get into the best physical condition that we could. And then joined the Navy. And after that, it was just the speeding freight train. 9/11 occurred. I'll briefly explain the training pipeline, which is well over a year of training and selection. You start with BUDS, which is an acronym, of course, stands for Basic Underwater Demolition SEAL. That's typically what you see in documentaries and movies, the depiction of BUDS and Hell Week, which is only the 5th week of this 16 to 18-month training pipeline. And then you go on to advanced training or SEAL qualification training, SQT. And between that week gap of BUDS and SQT was when 9/11 happened. So going into advanced training, we knew that we were transitioning quickly from peacetime SEALs into wartime SEALs.
Wow.
So I went on to graduate, went to SEAL Team 5. By that time, we were about 9 months out from rumors of conflicts in Iraq spinning up. So my task unit, we call it a troop now, it's essentially 2 platoons, about 40 SEALs and dozens of support staff. Our troop was actually the first troop of SEALs in Iraq in early 2003, the very first troop in Iraq to perform what we call capture or kill missions, essentially hunting down terrorists on the deck of cards or the blacklist, other various insurgent faction leaders. So Did combat deployments with 5, spent a lot of time in Iraq, Africa, some other theaters of war. Hadn't planned on doing it as a career. I will say in full transparency, looking back, I was like, well, I should have done more, or I should have stayed in longer. But back then, there was no concept that these conflicts could possibly go on as long as they have. We're looking back at Desert Storm, how quickly that came and went, and we were wrong. But nonetheless, I transitioned out, went to graduate school, and then dove headfirst into the world of entrepreneurship, which essentially, I believe, has about the same failure rate as skill training, about 90%, and have built and sold a couple companies. And then my current organization, Taking Point Leadership, we're a leadership and organizational development consulting firm. And to your point, my first book, Taking Point, kind of was the strategy there was to write the book and then build organizational development principles around the principles in the book, and build a company and team around that, which we have done. And then, of course, the new book, Embrace the Suck, with a great gut punch of a forward by my former teammate and friend, David Goggins. Many, if not all of your listeners or viewers will know who he is, former retired SEAL, world-renowned ultra athlete. And and it's been quite a journey. I've got a wife, 4 kids. Our youngest is 3 weeks old. We have had a New Year's Eve baby.
Oh, so congratulations.
We figured 2020 wasn't chaotic enough, so let's throw another human in the mix.
Wait a second. So let's break it down. You were really on a path. You didn't have any military members in your family prior to this.
Well, my dad had been a Marine reservist during Vietnam, had not deployed, and never really talked about it, and never pushed military service on my twin brother nor I. So it wasn't really a thing that was discussed as a potential career path.
So this wasn't the path, and you really wanted to be a business person growing up, and that's how you went to college.
Yeah.
Okay, so as a layman, what's the fail rate when you go with your buddy to become a Navy SEAL, and first the Navy and then the Navy SEAL, then Navy SEAL for deployment? How many really make it? What percentage really make it? Because obviously you were training, like you really did it. You leaned in. You just didn't say, I want to be a Navy SEAL. You were putting in the hard work. What percentage really make it?
It's interesting, and I'll kind of give you a full answer there. One is that what people don't talk about often is if you break it down, there's roughly we run 6 classes a year, so every 2 months. And there's roughly, if you break down the numbers, they might even be higher these days, about 1,000 applicants if you just average it out per class. Okay. And of that, you'll probably start with, let's say easy math, around 200 students in a class. Now, and then you'll typically graduate 20 to 30 of those students. You'll weed down to, give or take, your graduating class by the end of Hell Week. So by the end of the 5th week. So, and obviously that's intentional. We're not trying to spend hundreds of thousands of tax dollars on students that aren't going to, successfully navigate the course. There's multiple reasons, but that's being one of them. And so it's really interesting because when you get there, and it kind of starts as we're the teams, SEAL teams, but the first couple of weeks, it's kind of an individual exercise, and everybody's kind of sizing each other up, and you're trying to, think about, who's going to make it, who's not. If you try to handpick the 20 or 30 or so students that are going to be standing tall at graduation, you'd be lucky to get 1 or 2 of those correct. It's such an interesting social experiment when it comes to the mental, emotional, physical, and cognitive attributes of students that are more likely to navigate this course. And we've actually, of course, been intentional, just like any well-run organization, to, from a talent acquisition standpoint, try to identify those attributes so that we can bring students in who are more likely to graduate. Because we would like to have more SEALs, but it's arguably the hardest training pipeline of special operations.
Right.
And so, and it's one of the things I focus on in the book is it really comes down to the data points. Initially, the narrative that data might paint is not what you would think. Extreme physical capability, like high levels of academic capability and intellect, when of course fitness and intelligence are critically important. It really comes down to the less measurable data points of great resilience and a deep passion to serve, not just serve in the military, but to serve as a special operator, as a SEAL. And if we think about any walk of life, any lofty goal you've ever achieved, any goal you've ever achieved in your illustrious career, first of all, it didn't come without pain, suffering, adversity, and anxiety. you know?
Right.
And second of all, it took passion and an emotional connection to the long-term vision to drive you through those inevitable obstacles. And that's what drives these students to succeed. It doesn't have anything to do with them being an Olympian or, you know, a Stanford lacrosse player. We get a lot of those. And then we get people who, you know, come from no real significant background, who end up being rock stars in the class. So it's
truly, so what you're saying, it's truly rare air, but it's based on other factors than what us laymen would think. Like you said, strong physicality and things. It more comes down to resilience and the ability to just keep moving forward.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. So let's go back to Goggins, who I'm a huge fan of, and I've read his materials and I follow him. This is in the forward. This is the quote in the forward. The pain that you are willing to endure is measured by how bad you want it. So
kind of goes back to what we were just talking about, right?
Exactly. And, you know, you have a theme in this great book, Embrace the Suck. And again, for our listeners and our viewers, we've got Brent Gleason with us. You can find Brent at takingpointleadership.com or buy his book and read this great book. The ability to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Unpack that and unpack Goggins' quote so our viewers and our listeners can understand really, you know, what's the core of what makes you so great, Brent?
Sure. I'll take it back even one step further. Often I get it. Well, embrace the suck, you know, catchy title. What does that mean exactly? Yeah. And it's a phrase born in the military, obviously adopted in the ranks of special operations and special operations training and just the lifestyle in general. But essentially it's saying, look, the battlefield, and we can be talking about the literal battlefield or the figurative battlefield in this context. The battlefield is tough. You know, don't just accept it, lean into it, and move more quickly from the normal human emotion, that bunker of human emotion that all impacts us when we face adversity of, you know, the surprise, anger, depression, and eventually, hopefully, acceptance, enlightenment, wisdom, and taking action, and moving more quickly through that path towards action-oriented execution and developing a plan, taking stock of your current reality, and stepping back onto that battlefield of life. That's essentially what the Embrace the Suck philosophy is. It's not just accepting life's inevitable obstacles and the pain and the suffering and anxiety we face, but leaning into it, saying, you know what, great, because adversity really, with the right mindset, of course, is the mother of success. It is the mother of reinvention, of reassessment, of transformation. Think about all the things we've all been through personally and professionally over the past 10 months. I mean, talk about the necessary reinvention for all of us, or just reassessment. When we face these very, very unforeseen obstacles like COVID, I can guarantee you someone with your background did the same thing I did. I started taking stock of, you know, my current resources, you know, what I need, where are we going as a business, where are we going as a family, looking at all the waste and things that we weren't paying attention to. It really is all about reinvention. And that phrase, get comfortable being uncomfortable, is very similar philosophy, obviously, to embrace the suck. It's born from the Naval Special Warfare community, but it just means, you know, being more intentional in the fine and subtle art of comfort zone expansion. Yeah. Expand your comfort zone intentionally. And the more you do it, and the more you lean in, and the more you embrace the things that maybe you're not all that good at, and you approach life with a growth mindset as opposed to a fixed mindset, you're being intentional in expanding your comfort zone. And the things that used to live outside that comfort zone, the goals that used to seem insurmountable, or the obstacles that, you know, made you cringe, become part of your everyday life. And then you continue that lifestyle and you keep moving the goalposts and doing it again. You know, we just came into a new year. People were making their New Year's resolutions. Right. And while you and I would both agree that any goal should be, you know, measurable, concise, achievable, time bound. Right. You know, I joked about this on the Today Show because they call me out about it. You know, I say in the book, I say New Year's resolutions are for losers. What I mean by that, I'm not talking about goals and a renewed sense towards, you know, how you approach life and work, but it's about making incremental choices every single day to be in a constant state of improvement. Not saying like, well, come January 1st, I'm going to start A, B, and C. And, you know, research, I don't know who's doing this research, but shows that these resolutions fall off by mid-February. That's 6 weeks. That's right. It's really true. You know, Brent, let's pause there because before we went on the air, you and I were having a great catch up and we were talking about today. You and I are doing this interview today. You're down in the San Diego area. I'm up here in Fresno and we get to do this interview.
but the inauguration's happening today. America's turning over today. It's in many ways a wonderful day to celebrate. But we are still living through this pandemic. And one of the messages that I've given our team, we have about 1,200 employees here at ERI, goes to your point. It's a choice, right, Brent? If you want to come through this, and when people talk about being a new normal when we get to the other side, I feel that that's such a defeatist mindset and mentality. My message here has been, we're going to get to the other side, and as a company and as people, be a new better. Is that really the message you also want to give people, that you get this book, you embrace these principles, you embrace the suck, which I just love the title. You can be a new better as well. Is that really some of the core of what you're trying to get at?
100%. Because, for a while, many of us, I'm probably guilty of this as well. We're saying, well, when this is all over, or when things go back to normal. And then we started to graduate to, well, this is the new normal, and still not even quite there. The mindset of, no. This was what we call an inevitable life ambush, a business ambush. Nobody had this in their 2020 contingency plans. Many of us had our 2020 projections shot to hell.
Right.
So what? At the end of the day, yeah, it was a bit of a shock at first, but the organizations like yours, like many of our clients, and like we've done to a degree,
right,
have pivoted very rapidly by really good planning, really good engagement of all or the majority of the organization. Like I write in my first book, organizational change or transformation efforts in a normal chaotic business environment still typically fail or fall short of meeting their objectives, according to McKinsey and Deloitte, and year over year of research and data.
Right.
It could be macro changes or micro changes down to the project level or business unit level, but the organizations that get it, and you've seen this, are going to come out of this stronger, more scalable, more fiscally responsible, probably with one or two new revenue streams.
Right.
How they interact with customers, how they interact with their employees, their ability to leverage technology and digital transformation to engage with teams. It's really a lot of this, the permanency in a lot of this is going to make organizations, the ones that have been tackling this head on, as opposed to the wait and see mentality, are going to possibly be even more profitable in a way if they put all these resilience principles in place and create scale from the forced innovation.
Is resilience something that you're born with, Brent, or is it learnable, and is it then become a muscle that you keep having to exercise and grow?
Sure, it's a great question. I get that a lot. It does actually, and I touch on this in the book, the concept of resilience, which has been studied in various settings, does still pose a challenge to psychologists and behavioral scientists. Whereas, some are in the school that, certain people have more resilience, grit, mental fortitude than others. I argue with the questions of do I have in our resilience bank account, do I start life with a higher balance than you do? How do I make more deposits?
Right.
Do we have more than others? And if you think about, take David Goggins and me, for example, showing up at the same Buds class. Now, arguably, this was his third Buds class, because I used to joke that he just loved Helvig because he just kept doing it over and over. And two wildly different backgrounds. I grew up in a upper class neighborhood in Dallas, Texas, went to private school my whole life, whereas David grew up with relatively extreme adversity, racism, childhood obesity, learning disabilities, an emotionally and physically abusive household. You've read about it in the book. It's gnarly. And so you might think, well, people in that situation might naturally develop more resilience than others. Sometimes those situations are debilitating, and it depletes their ability to have that sort of natural grit and resilience. So to some degree, it's a choice, and it was a choice for him. And for me, it was a choice to engage in what I refer to as purposeful suffering. We all have that sort of flame burning inside of us, so we either snuff it out, or we look at it, we listen to it, we touch it, we feel it, we use it to channel us down to, the road less traveled, or taking calculated risk, or trying to set loftier stretch goals, as opposed to staying in our comfort zone where things are good, but you stay too long in your comfort zone, and the ultimate outcome will be regret, possibly depression, and just overall mediocrity. I mean, even studies show that, people who take more risk or who've been through hardships that they didn't plan for and come out, stronger are emotionally more mature. They're have a different outlook on life in a positive way. They're happier. They're more inspirational to others, and they give to causes greater than themselves. So it's obviously my philosophy is that resilience is like any muscle, and if you are intentional and pushing its boundaries, and making tough choices and doing hard stuff, obviously things that are in line with the goals you want to achieve in your value system. But then you will continue to develop it more and more over and over. But being more intentional in that journey, you'll get there quicker.
For our listeners and our viewers that have just tuned in, we're so honored to have with us today American hero Brent Gleason, founder and CEO of Taking Point Leadership. To find Brent and his great company and colleagues, you could go to takingpointleadership.com. His clients are just a who's who of what's what, from Bank of America to Raytheon to Boeing. You could hire Brent to work with your firm, or you could read his book, Embrace the Suck, and learn the principles that have gotten him to be a big success besides an American hero. Brent, I have two children now. They're actually behind me in that was when they were much younger. They're 34 and 28. And then I have 1,200 employees who become sort of adopted children in many ways if you're doing a good job as a leader. I always feel that one of my core messages, and you tell me if I've got this right or wrong, is no one gets through this journey unscathed. So is it right to expect that we're all going to face challenges, and it's really how we deal with those challenges that really defines who we are and how we get through this thing and how we get success or failure?
Yeah, one of the quotes, I try to weave in some quotes that I really like and are inspired by throughout the book. And one of them is, the most massive characters are seared with scars.
Oh, yeah.
And it's a really powerful quote because it really answers the question you just asked. And the character that we develop over time. When I transitioned out, became an entrepreneur, with my first two companies were more technology focused companies. Therefore, my in digital media, analytics, et cetera. And so my employee base was largely younger, so millennial. Let's say out of my last company, out of a couple hundred employees across 3 offices, New York, Vegas, and San Diego, I'd say a good 70% were millennial. So not to go down the millennial path, but I had to really work hard at adjusting my leadership style, my management capability, in learning how to, and this is what we teach, our clients as well, is learning how to connect and motivate different people. We all have different needs. And when you look at motivation theory, it's, between autonomy, mastery, and purpose, you still have to boil that down into the individual. And now it's even more complex than ever, managing and leading remote teams. But at the same time, I've always tried to bring it back to, having been blessed with the opportunity to serve in the capacity that I did, I have a unique ability or platform when it comes to our employees to, share some of that perspective, if you will, when it comes to hardship and anxiety and putting the things, I joke in the book about, I tell my SEAL buddy and good friend Jason Redman his story. Great battlefield commander, got ambushed, got shot 7 times in the face, chest, and arm, almost died, walked by himself unaccompanied to the medevac helicopter, and then got so annoyed with people coming into his hotel or his hospital room and at Bethesda, and they were crying over his scars and what he couldn't do and the things that he wouldn't be able to do the rest of his life. He's like, time out, people. So he wrote this amazing inspirational sign. I share it in the book. Basically say, look, stop right there. If you're coming into this room to cry over my, my loss and my scars, my injuries, go elsewhere. This is a room of happiness, of rapid regrowth. I will recover 110% and more, and then I'll push it another 20% out of sheer mental tenacity. And he's like, if you're not prepared for that, then go elsewhere. And he signed it to the management. And it caught the attention of the then president, George W. Bush. And, it now hangs in the wounded area of Walter Reed. And he was brought to the White House and things like that. And, after sharing the story, I say, feel kind of stupid because you just stepped on a Lego and screamed a bunch of flurry of expletives. Again, bringing it back to that perspective that we all need, all of us need all the time. I need it too. When, my wife is really good at bringing me back to it. She's like, well,
right.
I'm complaining about this. This is, you're worrying about things that are out of your control, or you're overstressing about something. Like she's like, we got this. So we all are have a natural human emotion when stress or anxiety or uncertainty inevitably hit us. But it really is a unique opportunity, to your point, to take a leadership angle in that when it comes to developing teams, employees, and we obviously use that with our clients too. So.
Brent, something tells me, although you and I haven't met personally yet, and one day we will, that you were going to be a success regardless if you had gone to the SEALs or not. You were going to be a business success, which was your original dream. Unpack a little bit about getting out of the SEALs and starting your first two companies now as an entrepreneur with your graduate degree, and how your SEAL training and what we're learning in this book, Embrace the Suck, and also in your other bestseller, Taking Point, how that made you more successful and how those companies succeeded more than they would have if you hadn't become a SEAL.
Sure. I guess I can answer that in the sense of, if I had 2 to 3 core takeaways from my, relatively comparatively brief time as a SEAL. I've got buddies who've done, 14 combat deployments. Right. These are career SEALs or 20 plus years. But even in that brief time and spending time in combat and spending time with great combat leaders, learning from them, I wouldn't even push back. I don't know what success would have looked like had I not been in the military. I'm sure, with my just normal drive, curiosity, and sort of appetite for taking risk, would have done, some cool things. But at the same time, I really have no idea, because I attribute much of my success, however we want to define that, comes from the mindset transformation that occurs not just in the military, but for certain in the military service, but also in the upper echelons of special operations, and then using those skill sets that you develop, both actual skill sets and mental skill sets, on the literal battlefield. One of the things that I take away from a leadership standpoint, and I believe I know you agree with this, any good leader or effective leader will say, is a lifelong learner, humble, and never satisfied with the status quo, especially when it comes to ourselves. We crave feedback. We want that feedback. We don't just, sometimes it, makes you cringe a little bit, but we quickly move to like, great, roger that, I'm going to apply that. Or great, roger that, I'm going to take stock of that and make sure that I'm in that constant state of development, not just how I perceive myself as a person or a leader, but more importantly, how your 1,200 employees see you as a leader and of the organization. So one is, personal accountability. That's critical. We're human. We're not always perfect at that, but having the discipline to continually be able to, debrief with yourself. I talk about that, after action review model in the book, but instead of a team or organization, let's use it on ourselves, to not just celebrate the wins, but kind of take stock of the losses and be like, where did I fall short? Where did I deviate from my core values? Where did I disconnect from my emotional connection to that goal? What distractions stood in my way? And so one is that level of discipline and accountability, but probably even overarching is anxiety and stress management are a little easier because of the perspective you gain just on the world in general and the reality of how freaking good so many of us have it, despite the dumb stuff that we complain about day in and day out, myself included. So continuing to remind ourselves, remember the stuff that you saw downrange, remember the stuff that you did or didn't do, or the guilt you carried for this or for that. Put all that in a bucket and remind yourself, pour it over your head every now and then to say, hey, wake up. Someone has it worse than you do. Many people have it worse than you do. So that perspective when it comes to, anxiety, stress, or the inevitable obstacles of life. And also, I'd say the third thing is, and this might surprise you or the listener viewer, is greater levels of empathy and humility. And if you don't have that going into SEAL training alone, it'll either be beaten into you or it'll push you out of that pipeline organically. And experiencing what you do, seeing what you do, doing what you do, experiencing the loss of teammates and friends time and time again, you gain this really this heightened sense of empathy, or being in a combat zone and seeing non-combatants or children or grandparents. I've been in situations where 1 minute we're blowing the door off and we're in a gunfight. 2 minutes later, I have my rifle slung and I'm carrying 2 4-year-old girls across the room because there's glass all over the floor. Having that ability to dial your intensity and focus up, but also dial it down to a heightened sense of emotional intelligence, self-awareness, and empathy is a good skill set. I think you would agree to have just in life.
So good.
And so as a business leader.
It's so good. Talk about the importance of friends and also who you surround yourself with. What percent are your good friends still a lot of the SEAL members that you became brothers with along the way?
They are, and it's such an interesting community. And this, even while you're in too, you make great friends in the SEAL training pipeline, and you go to different teams, and then you make your teammates are like family. Like family, you don't always get along, but you respect the hell out of each other. And when it's time to work, there's a switch that's flipped, and you would intentionally dive into a hail of bullets just to save the person to your left and right without a second thought.
Right.
And it's a fascinating thing and very hard, if not impossible, to replicate in the civilian world, just because the training and the actual stakes are as high as they could possibly be. But when it comes to friends and your social circle, my social circle is pretty small right now. When it comes to the funny thing about it, I always joke about this, like my teammates or really good SEAL friends. And, we're all kind of guys. So we could go for 3 years without even seeing or talking to one another.
Right.
You get a text me, "What's up, bro? What's up? How you doing? Good. Okay." And then that 3 years is erased. So it's like you never skipped a beat. It's really cool. So I keep in touch with those guys because it also gives me that continued emotional connection to the community. I'm on the board of the SEAL Family Foundation. So I've been on that for 7 years, and it helps me stay connected and continue to serve. So I connect with the teams through that capacity as well. But to that point, if we think about the importance of our friends, our social circle, as it relates to our life, our aspirations, our goals, our core values, one easy explanation is when I made that decision to transition from financial analyst to train to become a SEAL, I actually looked at one of the things I looked at when assessing my current environment to develop that plan of action to train. I looked at my social circle and I looked at, okay, there's some people here who I know are going to support me. And research shows that a lot of this research is more geared towards children, but children who become eventually experts in certain fields, like say musicians or artists, during their most developmental years, they had a very supportive family and social circle. They had unemotional coaches who would push them to that next level of performance, and et cetera. And so I removed people from my life that I knew. Obviously, we all have the haters. We don't need to go down that path, but also just the people who either don't wish you well or are a distraction. And that's okay.
Right.
Audit that social circle and that friendship multiple times throughout our lives. Most of the people I'm close with now have a pretty tight, small social circle of actual friends. We all have a lot of acquaintances, but
correct. But when you read the anecdotally, I've always read that you really become your 5 closest people that are to you, besides your wife and children. That's really what defines you. So having good people that support you is really a necessary part of the journey, whether they're SEALs or people that believe in your values and what your journey is. Isn't that true? Having distractions really is not good for people's development.
It's not. And again, we're hopefully, we're all busy doing great things, and there's no time for the nonsense. There's no time for spending time, emotion, or thought on either people who don't have your best intentions in mind, or even worse. So there's no time for it, and it's just a waste. Having that, like you said, that circle of 4 or 5 people that you can always count on, that will always lift you up, is extremely healthy. But anything outside of that is just kind of a waste of emotion.
If you've just joined us, we've got Brent Gleason with us today. He's the founder and CEO of Taking Point Leadership. You can find him at takingpointleadership.com. He also wrote the book, best-selling book, Taking Point. He's also written Embrace the Suck. There's nobody that would deny, Brent, that this pandemic, as you said at the top of the show, is not only unexpected, it's not only tragic, it sucks for all of us, no matter where we are, whether we're sitting here in the United States, but also around the world. This pandemic has sucked. And what I would like you to share with our viewers and our listeners is, if we're all living through the suck right now today, and we're going to get to the other side, science is going to win, the vaccines are coming, we got it. But still, we're 6 months minimally up to a year away from getting back to some sort of new better. How do we embrace this suck period still and come across a new better? Can you share can people really read your book, and given that they're just civilians, get to the other side and learn 1, 2, or 3 great points from this book and really be better on the other side of this pandemic, this suck period?
Yeah, absolutely. And when I started down this path, admittedly, I didn't realize 2020 would suck so bad. So selfishly, the timing is wonderful for me.
Right.
But one thing, I had never read a book that technically falls in the self-help genre before. So I started doing some research, and I found some really inspirational work, some good books, some popular books. Not a lot of books that were really actionable. That's what I really try to do in my first book, Taking Point, is make sure that every chapter has a very specific application to business leadership or culture or organizational development. And I wanted to do that. So each chapter has a mental model. And so I think we've all now graduated from the when this is all over mindset to, okay, we're in this, we're going to be in this for a while. And we need to start moving away from, the causal thinking of why me, why this, why now, into action-oriented execution. And if I had to pick, 1 or 2 things from the book to really take away in this current environment, we're kind of in a transitional period now where people are like, okay, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. We're a ways out from that. So life and business must go on. One of the pitfalls we as humans typically fall into is we waste a lot of time, emotion, and energy focusing on things outside of our control. One of the core tenets of resilient people and a growth mindset is they focus predominantly only what's in their control and sphere of influence. And that way they have a greater impact, they're more confident, and they achieve or exceed more of the goals they set. And also, so the subset of that is they're happier, they're more fulfilled, et cetera. And they build upon that momentum. Whereas a fixed mindset typically focuses on the things outside of our control, less on what's in our control, and we stay in that environment for far too long or permanently, and therefore there's no development, there's no growth, and we rarely sometimes get out of that, that swamp or quicksand of mediocrity. And so what I would say is, and a lot of people have done this already, a lot of businesses have done this already, but need to continue down that path, is take a tactical pause, take stock of your current reality, and develop a plan of action for your family, for your personal finances, for your business, for your career, and possibly even for your own mental health as well, for your wellness practices, wellness activities. Develop a plan and design that plan based on what's in your control. So one of the things we teach our clients, and I write about in the book, is sort of your own, taking it from a team mission planning perspective to more of a personal mission planning perspective. You can do it for your family or your business, but also just for your own personal goals, whether it be a fitness goal or a business goal or a career goal. Is identify your core objective. What is your objective statement to navigate the next year or so related to this pandemic as it relates to family, business, et cetera. You could look at your, a lot of businesses like the objectives and key results, or the OKR model. So a nice, clear, concise objective statement that's powerful. You can connect to it. It gets you excited. But then a few sub-bullet points or KPIs that say, okay, here's how we're going to execute this. And taking, go from X to Y, equals Z by such and such a date. So it's time bound. But then identifying, okay, what are my resources? What do I have now or need to acquire to achieve this objective? What are our threats and blockages? Well, we've already identified most of those. One of the great things about this transition now is it's going to be hard. It's going to be very similar to last year, minus most of the surprises.
Right.
Hopefully.
Right.
Anything can happen. But you still want to take stock of the threats and blockages and obstacles that do or could possibly pop up and stand in your way of achieving that objective. Apply some of the lessons learned we've all inevitably absorbed over the past 10 months. And then you have a plan. And I always recommend with any plan, whether it's your personal plan, team, or organization, is apply a red team model. Basically, have a small team committee or one accountability partner poke some holes in your plan and ask you, have you considered this? Have you considered this? Have you considered this? You don't debate it. You just take notes. If there's a gem of wisdom in there, apply it to your plan. And then you develop your actions, the what, the who, the when. You know, what am I going to do? What needs to be done? And when am I going to do it by? So continue to develop these action plans, whether it's, you know, for your family or whether you're a business owner, you know, a leader manager or a direct contributor. And so this might apply to your career. Have this plan. Then you have a 60%, a 70% plan. You go back, you apply some contingencies. Then you have an 80% plan. That's as far as you go. There's no such thing as a 100% plan.
Right.
You know, you wouldn't have gotten to where you are without it because they don't exist.
Right. That's so true. That's so true. You're so right. Like I always say, man plans and God laughs. Man plans and God laughs. So that's right. That 20%. You know, I love your website, Brent. When our listeners go to your website, is that for hiring you to give this kind of training to their companies, or do people hire you even one-on-one to help themselves improve one-on-one? How does it really work besides reading your book?
Sure. I mean, we're a full-service leadership and organizational development consulting firm, essentially in its highest level, building higher performing teams that drive better business outcomes through, because we always ask that question, what drives profit in an organization, assuming we're talking about a for-profit organization. Yes. And you get all these different answers. And it's essentially the number one thing is customer retention. And how do you retain customers? Well, through high quality products and services. Where do you get those from? Well, great people doing cool stuff and highly engaged employees who are passionate about what they do. Where do you get that from? Well, you get it from good leadership. And not just at the top, like folks like yourself, but
right,
cascading all the way down to the frontline contributors, where you have that environment where essentially everybody leads. That's what's great about the special operations community is that on the battlefield or in training or off the battlefield, you're expected to be a leader regardless of rank, title, or tenure. And that's one of the core foundations of a high-performing team mindset. And you get great leaders by developing them. So it really comes down to, you know, that progression when you think about, you know, the success of an organization. Is identifying those people in your organization that you can continue to develop to create higher levels of performance. I think I got off that tangent, but I want to make sure.
Oh, but that's great. You know, Brent, when I interview pilots, I ask them about the level of difficulty of what Sully pulled off on the Miracle on the Hudson. And they tell me, most pilots will tell me, like, he was the perfect human being to do what he did, but still the odds were long and wide, 1,000,000 to 1, 100,000 to 1. It was truly miraculous what he pulled off. Given that we're almost 10 years removed from the SEALs taking out bin Laden, what were the odds going into that when leaders like Obama and the other great leaders that run our country in the Defense Department had to make that call to go do that, and they called on the great SEALs who pulled that off? Level of difficulty on those. I know there's so many other missions we never hear about. That one was very public. Level of difficulty and danger on that kind of stuff.
Well, it's interesting. One thing we don't think about is, you know, the squadron from Dev Group. You know, we're not supposed to say the name, but it's our Tier 1 Special Operations Unit.
Yeah.
And so it's everybody knows the name, but what we don't think about is the fact that they've done probably a dozen similar missions the month before, and they did a dozen similar missions the following month. This was the high-profile mission per se, obviously. But I'm one of my closest friends and former teammates at Team 5, Mark Owen, who wrote No Easy Day and No Hero. No Easy Day being the first book written about the bin Laden mission.
Right.
And so obviously I have some. You can read the book. About the same insight that I have that you would get from the book that I do from him. But when they got, a lot of, who gets what mission in the Tier 1 world of special operations comes from who's in country, availability, who can get there fastest, some capability, obviously. And this one, by the grace of God and many other factors, fell onto, the SEALs. And so they were spun up a couple weeks prior, but they, just like we did in the regular teams for many of our missions, they trained for 2 weeks, day and night. I believe it was about 2 weeks, might have been shorter, on a more or less two scale replica model of the compound. So by the time they hit these targets, that's what's fascinating about special operations is you rehearse every mission, if possible, Doesn't matter if you're doing 2 in a night, you dirt dive and rehearse, apply lessons learned, and kind of work out the kinks over and over again, just like any high-performing team or individual does. Doesn't matter how many times you've done it. You're going to rehearse. You're going to envision your role and responsibility, everybody else's role and responsibility, and what the winning outcome is going to look like. So by the time they executed the mission, everybody on the team knows where they're supposed to land, how many steps from land zone to the first breaching point, to this, to the internal structures and working in the room. And of course, they practice for contingencies. And what was the first thing that happened when they got over that target?
Right.
Helo 1 goes down.
Right.
Murphy's Law, right?
Right.
And so, but they had in some capacity practiced for a helo crash or some type of other major obstacle.
Right.
Some type of major event like that, assuming that Murphy's going to show up, which he usually does. And so, as you know, I mean, thank the Lord, nobody was killed in that crash. The pilot really made a very solid, immediate tactical decision to bury the nose down quickly so that the helicopter, once the tail hit the wall, didn't roll. When helicopters roll, that's when people die. And so, but again, your adrenaline's going, so high that, Mark, for example, didn't even realize that he fractured 2 vertebrae in his neck.
Wow.
and then got shot while he was on target. It was not a lethal wound, but he, nonetheless, he still got shot.
Wow.
Didn't realize his back was broken more or less till like a week later. Point being is like high performance teams practice. High performing individuals do this regardless of the fact that you've done it a million times. You always have a very, very rigid and disciplined approach to the execution of what you're going to do.
That's awesome. Brent, I have one last question before I let you go today, and you've been more than kind and generous with your time today. One of the great quotes in your new book, and for our listeners out there, Embrace the Suck, I really highly recommend this book. We're living through a sucky period in world history. Hopefully we never have to live through this again, but this will help you make it through it, and not just make it through it, make you better in the process. I love the line, do something that sucks every day. And, we're all conditioned. There's not one of us that wouldn't love to buy a pint of Ben & Jerry's ice cream and watch Seinfeld reruns on the couch every night. But what do you truly mean by do something that sucks? And what? And give something to our listeners right now that's actionable that they can start doing right now before they even read your great book.
That phrase is not intended to allude to the fact that we do the wrong things that suck every day. It's about being intentional in setting the right goals, taking the right amount of calculated risk, these personal goals, professional goals, fitness goals, whatever they might be, and then identifying the things, the obstacles along that path to the achievement of that goal, whatever that goal might be. There's going to be things that you don't like doing, things you're not that good at, things that make you cringe, things that you really just have a distaste for. Think about growing a business. As a business leader, we don't love every aspect of what we do. There's things that we're not good at, things we got to develop, and things we just hate doing. So typically we delegate.
Right.
Don't forget the fine art of delegation. However, in this case, I'm talking about identifying the things that stand in our way and the things that we're not good at and being intentional in practicing those things. For example, one of the things, as a leader, I've had to work on through feedback and there's my own developmental opportunities and growth opportunities is, ironically, on the literal battlefield, I'll run towards a hail of bullets. But in a business setting as a leader, sometimes I have a tendency or have had a tendency to avoid the difficult conversations. The angry board member or the client that I know is about to cancel their major contract or the employee that I have to let go. I'm always kind of like, I'll do that Thursday, and then come Thursday, I'm like, oh, I'm really busy today. Probably need to push that to next week.
Right.
So it's like, no. And my wife tells you, she's like, honey, just right between the eyes, like, just do it, get it done. And then once you start intentionally practicing those things that suck or that I don't like doing, I find that one, it's not that big and scary. It's not that hard. And the more you do it, the more confident you get, within that skill set, whatever it might be. And then go find the next big, hairy, audacious obstacle and tackle that one. And then make that part of your lifestyle and do something like that every day. You have some developmental opportunity every day. Whether if it's a fitness goal, pushing yourself a little bit harder each day, doing something that, is a little more uncomfortable each day. And that that signifies mental and physical growth. And, you know, if we're not growing, we're essentially sort of dying a slow death.
That's great. Well, for our listeners out there, we've got Brent Gleason with us. Go to his website to find him, takingpointleadership.com. Read his New York Times bestselling book, Taking Point. Read his new book, Embrace the Suck, because we're all going through it. Brent, really, truly, God bless not only Texas, but God bless the great people like you who serve this great country that we live in. Today's the inauguration day. I'm so happy that and so honored to get to celebrate someone like you and your life and the wisdom that you have and you share in this book today. Thank you for being a guest on the Impact Podcast. I'm truly honored to have you on. You're making great impacts every day. And again, God bless you and the other young men and women who have served our great country.
Oh, God bless you, brother. Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation, and let's do it again sometime.
Anytime with you, anytime.
Thank you.
This edition of the Impact Podcast is brought to you by Trajectory Energy Partners. Trajectory Energy Partners brings together landowners, electricity users, and communities to develop solar energy projects with strong local support. For more information on how Trajectory is leading the solar revolution, please visit trajectoryenergy.com.